So these are the new Garmin Instinct 3s from Garmin, and Garmin did something kind of unexpected by putting an AMOLED display into an Instinct body, which went away from the memory and pixel displays that they've had for years since they first came out. And you could arguably say that's one of the things that made an Instinct an Instinct, so putting an AMOLED display in here is a pretty big leap. But AMOLED displays have gained a ton of popularity with outdoor-focused sports watches, where these have overcome most of the challenges that these displays had previously, where these are now also another good option when it comes to a sports-focused watch. So even though it is a pretty big departure, I can't really argue with that decision either, where they're now giving us the option based on our preferences. You may want the longest battery life possible, you may prefer a brighter display, and hey, you may even actually not prefer as bright of a display. We can now have that choice now, but the question is, which one of these is actually right for you? So in this video, we won't just be talking about the big ticket items like the battery life and the display specs, which do differ quite a bit, but I'll also be going over every part of the interface to show you how these differ, like the widgets, the watch faces, the sport profiles, and even the data pages and the notifications. And it's pretty interesting to see because although these share the same name and share nearly all the same features, these are much different watches with how they act and how they feel, and that's anywhere from throughout the day, during activities, as well as at night. Battery life is definitely one thing for sure, but there's also just general usability and how we live with these watches, which also makes a big difference in terms of which one may be right for you. And if you do find the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor and just hit that like button down below. It's a small thing that you can do that'll help this video and the channel out quite a bit, and I appreciate it. Oh, and by the way, you may see a little bit of flickering or banding from the AMOLED version in some of the clips in this video, but that's just the frame rate on my camera not matching the refresh rate on my watch. You don't notice that in real life. Okay, so first up, let's talk about price. So the Instinct 3 starts out at $400 for the 45mm solar version, and then $50 more for the 50mm version, and then basically just $50 more for the equivalent AMOLEDs at $449 and $499. And then when it comes to sizes, so that's going to be the same on both the solar as well as the AMOLED, where they both have a 45mm option as well as a 50mm option. And here's how both sizes look on my 185mm circumference wrist. And for my particular wrist size, I can wear either one of these just fine. One kind of bummer though is that with the Instinct 3s, they're not offering the smaller 40mm option like they did with the previous generation Instinct 2, where now that smaller option is only available with the Instinct E. And I have thoughts on the Instinct E, which I'll be covering in a later video, but in summary, I'd really try to find an Instinct 2 if you're considering that watch. Now, when it comes to color, so they both have a standard as well as what they call a tropical pulse-themed Instinct 3. So there's a variety to choose from, although they don't actually exactly share the exact same theme across the board, where the black AMOLED model is actually all black, but the black solar model's bezel has an orange accent. But the exact themes are just slightly different between the two. So that's kind of interesting. So one of the things that has made an Instinct is their rather unique monochrome display with this little cutout window in the upper right-hand corner, which displays certain bits of information in the interface. It may just be a black and white display, but with this kind of transflected display, it's actually really good outdoors, where these kind of displays actually get better when it's brighter, and there's an incredible amount of contrast with these as well. You can kind of think of these displays as their pixels kind of like soaking up all that sun and literally reflecting it back to you. However, the other big advantage with these displays is that they are super efficient when it comes to power, and along with that, you then add in solar charging, and that's where you could potentially get unlimited power out of it with enough solar exposure. So putting an AMOLED display into an Instinct is a huge departure, where these kind of displays, on the other hand, consume much more power than a transflected display. However, the benefit with these kind of displays, though, is that these are similar to what we have on our smartphones, where these are super bright, they have tons of colors, they have tons of pixels, and they're also super vibrant. But one concern with these kind of displays over the years, other than battery life, is readability outdoors, where unlike transflected displays, which actually get better with more sun, these pixels need more power to get brighter to overcome sunny conditions. So as of let's say 4 to 5 years ago, these weren't as ideal for use outdoors. However, AMOLED display technology has improved drastically, and that's simply not really a concern anymore, where these now get super bright. But not only that, they're also much more efficient than before. Still not quite as efficient as the memory pixel displays, but still quite good. But when it comes to the actual specs, so these differ quite a bit in terms of the size as well as the pixels, where the AMOLED displays are larger and have more pixels, where the solar versions have less. However, the solar versions do have a solar panel surrounding the display, which takes up some of that room. And we'll certainly be talking about how different parts of the interface look on these two different types of displays in a second in a lot of details, but let's first talk about the different kinds of battery life that you can actually expect out of these. So when it comes to just using them as a smartwatch without recording any outdoor activities, the base battery life out of both of these is actually still pretty good, even out of the AMOLED models, but certainly more out of the solar models due to this kind of display technology. But there are two variables though when it comes to both of these kinds of displays. On the AMOLED versions, there's two different modes to the display: an always-on mode where the display display dims to a lower brightness when you're not interacting with it, as well as a gesture mode where the display actually turns off to conserve more on battery life. So if you choose to use the always on display mode on the AMOLED, that'll reduce the battery life quite a bit, where we're talking about a week or so. And then with the solar model, well, kind of the opposite kind of variable where it has solar charging capabilities, where that can actually increase the battery life with potentially unlimited battery life with enough solar exposure. But interestingly though, when it comes to battery life for recording outdoor activities, not as far off, but still definitely better on the solar model, and even better if you're in sunny conditions. So when it comes to battery life, you will simply get more out of the solar models, hands down, whether you have plenty of sun or not. But the trade-off there will be how these displays look and act in different conditions. So first off, when it comes to using them outdoors for sports, both are actually great, but again, they act a little bit differently. So for the solar model, this is great in the sun where it's super visible and has tons of contrast, so seeing the data on the display is easy for the most part. The downside though is that the display is going to be smaller than the AMOLED version, and there's also less pixels, so there's less information that can be shown on the display at one time. One reason for this, of course, though, is that it has that solar charging panel around the outside, so again, there's that battery life trade-off. But the AMOLED display is definitely no slouch outside either though, where this display can get super bright to overcome conditions outside, and there are definitely zero issues seeing this in direct sunlight. Now, if I had to say which one is better in direct sun, yes, it's the Instinct Solar, where it simply pops with a ton of contrast. But again, on the flip side, it is a smaller display both in terms of size as well as the amount of pixels. Now, one thing to note though about how these displays act outside to have the maximum amount of visibility when you're in direct sun is that you don't really have to do anything with the solar version where it doesn't need a backlight. But with the AMOLED version, when you're not interacting with it, the display turns off, or you have to set it to the always on display mode where it dims. And then to see it more clearly, you either have to turn your wrist or you have to start interacting with the watch for the display to get to full brightness. Now, the gesture mode when it comes to turning your wrist is a pretty natural gesture for the most part. So it's not like you have to intentionally flick your wrist in a weird way to get it to wake up. So it's kind of what you're naturally going to be doing all along anyways. However, the other use case outdoors is when you're in shady conditions, and this is where you actually may need the backlight on the solar version to see it, where in overcast or shady conditions, it can be a bit challenging to see. So it's definitely not like you don't ever need the backlight on either of these. So that's outdoors, but now let's just talk about day-to-day use in terms of general usability. And this part really all comes down to your personal preference. Now, if you like those vibrant colors with a super bright display like your smartphone, then go for the AMOLED, of course. But there is also something to be said for the solar version where this is more subtle throughout the day and isn't as noticeable, which some of you actually may want. But this also kind of spills over to use at night, where during nighttime hours, you may actually want something that isn't shining on your wrist. However, on the flip side, in the situation of, let's say, late at night in a darker room, like if you're watching TV, well, if you're using the always on display mode on the AMOLED version, you can still sort of make out what's on the screen without having to wake up the display to full brightness. With the solar version, it's much harder to see unless you get just the right angle with the right amount of light. At night, for the most part, with the solar version, you probably have to enable the backlight, and the backlight on memory pixel displays is a little bit harsh and not as subtle as an AMOLED display can be. But another advantage with the AMOLED display at night is that it also does have a red mode that can automatically enable during nighttime hours, which helps reduce blue light, which can interfere with your circadian rhythms. And you can actually have a choice of red, green, or orange. And then one more trick with the AMOLED display is that you can also change the font size in the interface, since the AMOLED display does have more pixels to work with. So that's something else to consider when choosing between these two watches. But other than how these act in different conditions, there's also how these display information, where the AMOLED display has more pixels and color, so it can display not only more information, but also have a little bit more context since it has a broader color palette. And what I mean by that is that even though these share nearly the exact same feature set, there's going to be differences like the sunrise and sunset widget, where the AMOLED version actually has additional information that you can scroll to, which isn't actually there on the solar version. Then there's also stuff like different widgets like the HRV status. There's an additional chart on the AMOLED version as well. Also, there's differences with the acute load widget, stuff like VO2 max, that's also a little bit more robust on the AMOLED version, and even activity summaries have more information. And then when it comes to watch faces, so these are going to be different since these have different display layouts. So there is going to be a difference in selection that you can have with these. And I'll just kind of go ahead and scroll through all of these so you can see some of the options that you have to deal with. And then in terms of functionality between an Android phone versus an iPhone, that's actually going to be the same here, where you can receive notifications on either of these, and reply functionality is also going to be similar as well, where with either, if you're on an iPhone, you can receive text, but you can't reply. However, if you're on an Android phone, you can reply to messages and calls with predefined responses. So there's not going to be any differences there other than how much information that you can see on the screen at one time. And then both of these also come with Garmin's morning report feature, where this is a screen that pops up first thing in the morning when you wake up that gives you important information information that you'd likely want to know, like your sleep score, training readiness, the weather, as well as any events that you have set for the day. And then when it comes to the built-in LED flashlights, these are the same between the two, where you'll be able to turn these on by double pressing the upper left-hand button, where you can then see 4 different brightness levels, as well as the red mode that they have. Now for sport profiles and activities, these are the same, well, for the most part, where these have all the same sport profiles between the two, where these come with pretty much everything that you can think of, whether that's running, cycling, swimming, both indoors and outdoors, multi-sport and triathlon modes. There's tons of outdoor recreation profiles, gym profiles, you name it, it's probably in there, including gaming, by the way. I did notice a couple of little inconsistencies here or there, where some of these actually have different names, even though they do the exact same functions, like let's say gravel versus gravel bike and stuff like that. But I'm just guessing that has to do with beta software that I'm running. And again, I'll just kind of go and scroll through all of these so you can see all of these sport profiles to see if it has what you need. Now, one difference though with the AMOLED model that I noticed is that it also gives you the ability to add apps or other functions that you can do with the watch in addition to the activity list. So here's where you can add functions like accessing the clocks, the Tides app, health snapshot, as well as some other functions. And again, that could be different just due to beta software that I'm running, but I'll go ahead and have an update in the comments section down below if I hear anything. And then when it comes to data pages and data fields, the AMOLED version can have up to 6 data fields on the page versus the Solar, which can have up to 5, including the cutout window. And another difference here too is that there's also charts and graphical data fields that are available in the AMOLED. Again, that display has more pixels to deal with, so you can have those more pixel-dense, data-rich displays. And then when it comes to maps, so these don't have the full-blown landscape and topo maps like their bigger brothers, the Phoenix and Enduros, but these do come with their new city names feature, which is kind of an interesting new feature where it'll display city names around you. And these look a little bit different due to the different kinds of displays, but both do have that feature. And then one more thing is that with strength training workouts, another difference here is that the AMOLED version can also display muscle maps of the muscle groups that you're working on during a workout. These really wouldn't look all that great on the display with the Solar version. Now, there are some other little inconsistencies with the interface that I found other than what I mentioned before. Like there's more controls that you can access on the AMOLED version versus the Solar. You also get a daily summary function with the AMOLED version, which can give you a summary of your day in the evenings. Again, I'm just kind of guessing that's a beta software thing, which will hopefully get mirrored across both versions. Oh, and then one more thing is that as of launch, the Messenger app isn't available on the Instinct 3 Solar, but that is slated to be added via software update in a week or so after they ship. So even though these share the same name, these are vastly different watches in my opinion, and I'm not just talking about battery life, it's just how they act and feel with these different kinds of displays. Battery life is definitely one thing for sure and can be super important in terms of how you use your watch, but the contrast with these displays, pun intended, makes these watches much different throughout the day, the night, as well as during activities. And it's kind of interesting because these are much different to each other than their memory and pixel or AMOLED counterparts, the Phoenix 8. Those are actually nearly identical in terms of the user interface and how they display information, where these act a lot different. But I think it realistically comes down to battery life, where if you don't really want to be concerned about charging your watch all that often, go with the Solar version, but if you are okay with charging your watch like once a week, the AMOLED will probably suit you just fine. And by the way, if you already own an Instinct 2X, I think it's actually going to be challenging to say it's worth the upgrade to the Instinct 3 Solar. You already have the flashlight as well as pretty much all the other features, but if you do own an Instinct 2, it could be worth a look if you want that flashlight feature. That's an extremely useful feature that I use every single day. Anyhow, that's a full rundown of all the differences between the new Instinct 3 Solar as well as the Instinct 3 AMOLED, but I definitely want to hear from you as well. Leave your thoughts down in the comment section down below of which one you prefer. And if you found the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor and also hit that like button, and also subscribe to the channel for my full in-depth reviews of these watches, which will be coming soon. In the meantime, have fun out there, and we will see you